Thank you. I am super excited to be here. I know some of you, great to meet everybody who don't know yet. We'll get to meet you after this. Talk about a topic today, which I've talked about a fair amount for the last probably 3 years, I guess. And it's still one of those things that if you're new to HubSpot forever, not very obvious. How do you go think about recurring revenue? How do you think about how to manage the process once the customer becomes a customer? Right, we talk a lot about marketing and sales. HubSpot started as a marketing tool, and it's gradually developed into more of a connected platform. They're really trying to share the love across all the hubs, support the customer through. So we're going to get into hopefully some pretty tactical ways that you can start thinking about managing recurring revenue beyond that point of initial sale. I have a couple of questions for you to get going. Hopefully this is a really easy one. Do you have a process, a clear process, a repeatable process for how you close deals the first time? The sales team has a pipeline, maybe they use playbooks in HubSpot, maybe they don't, but they know roughly what's happening, right? You get a lead come in, you have some process for qualification, some process for turning that lead, that deal, through your process, through your pipeline, to the point where they become a customer, you send a quote, you get paid, and you move on with your life, right? But the big question, and so many businesses that I talk to, and I would love to hear from some of you, what happens next? You close a new deal, bang the gong, send the Slack notification, what do? Is there an onboarding process? Is there a welcome email that gets sent? Is there definition around what happens after that initial sale is closed? And so we're going to get into some of that, and specifically, what happens when it comes time to renew that customer? If you're a recurring revenue business, and speaking predominantly what I'm going to talk about today is going to be B2B business with a recurring revenue model. So do you have that same clear, defined, actionable, transparent process for your team when it comes to managing the next time you need to close a customer? Or anything that happens in between the first deal being closed and that next time, right? There's lots of things that can happen in between first close one and the renewal, and if we want to be proactive about driving more revenue, about expanding customer accounts, about capturing the value that we're delivering to customers, we need a proactive process to do that confidently. We're going to get into that. And unfortunately, the reality of a lot of folks' approach to managing recurring revenue is kind of haphazard, and usually as a result of having fragmented data. Maybe the initial sale, the deal is in HubSpot. What happens to the rest of that revenue journey, the usage within a product after that point of sale, isn't even known inside of HubSpot how that's going to work. Inconsistent customer engagement. Some teams have an account rep, dedicated point of contact for each account that you've closed. In that case, it's relatively easy, right? That person is responsible for communication with that account and managing that process. Even when that's the case, at what cadence do you reach out to people? At what cadence do you engage with folks based on their usage? And in the case where you have a more scaled model, you have an automated motion, you have a lower touch engagement, like what are the points we should be reaching out and keeping contact with your customers? And then finally, my favorite of all, so quick, I'll get to background in a second, but the reason why this is my favorite is that everybody's approach, and generalizing pretty horribly here, but everybody's approach to churn is, we have a customer who is coming up for renewal, we see they're not in a great spot, let's try to fix it within the last 30 days. They have a renewal, we can answer that conversation and figure out why they might be not renewing, or even worse, like they churn. Now we're finding out they churn, how can we win them back? I'm Stuart, just a really quick intro today. You may have seen playbooks, skills workflow on LinkedIn. I now run Connecting GTM, which is very tactical use case playbooks for HubSpot, just like the ones that we're going to talk about today. Previously, I was at Arrows, which is a partner in the HubSpot ecosystem, running go-to-market. I went very deep into this specific playbook, this specific use case while I was there, on how to run customer success in HubSpot. That's enough about me. I'm going to skip pretty quickly over this slide because hopefully this is relatively obvious, right? If you are a recurring revenue business, you're spending money at the top of the funnel to acquire a new customer. It is incredibly important that you retain that customer, you hopefully expand that customer as much as possible get a great return on the investment you made in acquiring that customer. So these numbers at the bottom, NRR, net revenue retention, things that at the macro scale is a good measure of how efficiently acquiring, growing, and retaining customers. We want that number to be above 100%. That means we're expanding more customers than we're losing. And of course, we're acquiring customers, you get paid one time. How much revenue do we add? How much revenue do we lose against that initial amount? And obviously, if somebody churns, we lose it all, right? So that's not. This is really the sort of crux of the problem when we talk about renewal management and the impact of renewal management on the business, right? I've skipped marketing, whatever activities we're doing before sales here, but most of the focus is on the early part of the funnel, when in reality, the long tail of the funnel from closed one through to onboarding through to renewal is much, much longer than that initial sales cycle, right? Like hopefully, if the sales cycle, even if you're a long sales cycle, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever it might be, depending on your business, even if you have a long sales cycle, we're hoping to keep that customer for years. We want them to never churn. We want them to be in our business, continuing to receive value forever. And this retaining and expanding existing customers here is just going to keep repeating, right? Like this is hopefully year over year, compounding, increasing in value. I'm going to skip, go to the next thing, and hopefully what everybody is actually wanting to see, which is not the theory of why renewals are important. What do you actually do in HubSpot to start thinking about solving this problem, to build that repeatable motion, that predictable motion, as much as it can be inside of HubSpot? And I want to pull out here, before we go too much further, all of this stuff, everything that is in this playbook. I'm going to put in connected GTM, you'll just be able to deploy it using Supid, because why not? Supid is very, very nice, and when you speak and talk to all you wonderful people today. Supid, so if you want to go grab that for free, one-click deploy it into your account, go ahead and do that. So let's start with the very first piece, and there are different ways you could do this, but the way that I like to do it, and this is the thing that I have heard from people who've implemented my playbooks, the thing that has stood out, this was a big win for us, is actually having a defined renewal pipeline that's separate from your sales pipeline so that you can manage the progression of accounts from closed one to whatever that next every revenue milestone is, right? This is set up for annual renewal, if you're selling annual deals, you could do the same thing. If you're automatically billing people on a monthly basis, you maybe have less need to put every deal in a renewal pipeline like this. Certainly, if you have accounts that have more hands-on management, more defined contracts, putting them in a defined pipeline that allows you to track that progress, allows you to know who to engage, when the renewals are upcoming, it's really impactful. So I typically break this down by quarter by quarter. 6 to 12 months on the left-hand side, close one renewal on the right-hand side, and we can automate the movement of deals through this pipeline. We can automatically add deals to this pipeline when we win a new deal in sales, right? We can run a Hubspot workflow. When the deal moves to close one in our sales pipeline, let's create a new deal in our renewal pipeline, copy over all of the information that we care about from that initial sales deal so that we have that context. How do we make this as easy as possible, as transparent as possible? Our account management team, our customer success team, whoever's managing revenue beyond that point of initial sale, to understand what is going on with this customer and what is the revenue that is associated with this customer. I'm a big proponent of having individual pipelines definition around each of the stages of the customer journey. So renewal pipeline may live alongside an implementation pipeline, for example. Some process that you need to run that is, again, one-to-one manual with your team to get something up and running. Create a pipeline for that. Define the process, because this is going to make it much, much easier to understand what's the reality of our relationship with this account at every stage across that journey. For renewals, certainly a deal pipeline, we're talking about revenue. Deals are for revenue, tickets are for process. So renewal pipeline is based on the time until somebody is going to renew. Automate the movement through that pipeline based on the renewal date. You may have seen today's date, although that previously became the S3, thankfully solved that problem recently. So you can do days until renewal very easily now, and that's going to be the property you're going to want to use to automate, to look at how time to renewal based on that number, which stage of this pipeline are they sitting in. And we can do all sorts of interesting things in this pipeline to help show what is the status of this account. Right? Like you may want to break out, I really should include it on this slide, but you can break out using deal tags, using just property values on these deals. things that we want to know about this account. Is this somebody who has our highest level of support? Is this a high priority account? Is this somebody who's using a certain feature set or has a certain integration, for example? If you know many of have integrations, and the way that you service those customers is going to be drastically different based on that integration. If somebody has a Salesforce integration versus a Hubspot integration, and I can't believe I said that at Inbound. If you need to know that, and that's going to impact the way that you manage that customer, let's make it really obvious when we're looking at our pipeline, who are those customers. You might be syncing, we'll talk about product data in a second, but you may be syncing that data automatically into Hubspot, or maybe it's just something that is known in the sales process and you copy over into the renewal pipeline. To get to the product usage data in HubSpot, this is a new thing in HubSpot natively, it's in Service Pro, but you can do this health scoring all kinds of different ways, but is one of the things that if you're managing renewals, if you want to prioritize accounts, if you want to know which accounts you need to be having one-to-one conversations with, which can you let run in a more automated motion, having some notion of customer health is going to be helpful. And health scoring is a horrible topic for so many different reasons. I'm happy to answer any questions about health scoring specifically, but whether you're automating it or not, these are the 5 categories of things that I would look to have data on or look to include in any kind of notion of a customer health score. Product setup, I mentioned implementation pipelines. If somebody doesn't get implemented, if somebody doesn't get set up with your product, it is highly unlikely come renewal time, they're going to renew, right? At the best case, they're like, oh, it wasn't a priority, sure we paid for a year, but let's pay for another year and we'll try to get to it next year. That's the best case scenario. Chances are, if somebody doesn't set up the product, they've churned long before they actually get to your renewal date. So having this is likely just to be a checkbox, and I would recommend having a clear definition on what is set up in our product. What does implemented in our product actually mean? Just a checkbox. Are they implemented on that? And that you can have varying degrees of implementation. Maybe you have implementation for basic level of functionality, maybe you have implementation more advanced functionality, maybe we've implemented to the degree that one user needs to implement. Maybe we have more teams in here. And Cape and Arrows, customer onboarding, collaborative onboarding tool. We talked a lot about this. It never ends, right? Like implementation, you're always implementing new users, you're always implementing new features. So making sure that you're including that, whether it's in the product setup step or whether it's in your product usage and adoption step, have some notion that we need to continually evaluate, is somebody's account in a state where they are capable of receiving value. And that value will change, and the degree to which they receive value based on their implementation will change, based on the company, based on a specific account. But do they fundamentally have everything in place that they need to use our product effectively and actually get the return on the money that they pay that they want? Customer satisfaction, hopefully pretty self-explanatory. Are they happy with this? Whether you're using NPS, CSAT, whatever you're using, some notion, do they think things are going well? CSM Pulse, it's the opposite, right? Do we think things are going well? And this is only going to really apply if you have a one-to-one CS relationship with your customers. But what is our impression of how things are going with this account? And often this is actually, if you do nothing else with a health score, do this. It's the easiest place to start. Just create a property in HubSpot, good, bad, and different on this account, and use that as some kind of prioritization on who do we need to be reaching out with, especially if you're also tracking when did we last update that value. If we have an account that we don't know, let's go ask. Let's find out 6 months before a renewal, 9 months before a renewal. Let's start that conversation so we're not left from renewal day wondering why they changed. And then finally, and I put this last, but it's the hardest one to capture, it's the most important one to capture. Are people actually being successful in their definition of success, easy for me to say, with our product? Everybody wants to make health scoring super easy, everyone wants to make it automated, everyone wants to throw AI in there. But ultimately, the inputs that you need to know if a customer is being successful with your product are not going to be in your product data, are not going to be in your CRM, unless you put them there. You actually need to know, or need to ask, what is going on in your business context? What is going on in your business that will make this a success or not? And where are we tracking against this? Again, this is another one that's really hard to do unless you're having one-on-one conversations. I would say most businesses, and I'm doing the hot takes thing after this, so maybe this will be my hot take. Most businesses should be talking to their customers one-to-one way more than they actually. Everybody wants to scale everything, and ultimately the things that work for for customers and meaningful for customers, you can't scale very well. So figuring out how do we ask more often, get more qualitative feedback about what is happening with our accounts is going to make it much easier to actually be helpful to that account. Next up, and this is the output of those first two things, which are the accounts that we should be caring about, right? Like the obvious reasons why people will show up on this list. And there's 5 ways that you could be listing out your accounts depending on the way you're using Hubspot here. But the most obvious one is going to be, we have accounts that are close to renewal. We need to go figure out what is our playbook, how are we talking to them, and what are they going to get, what are we going to give them, or how is that conversation going to go with them to make sure that come renewal day, or ideally before, right? If we can lock in renewals before the renewal day, great, let's do that. That's the easiest thing. The next thing is going to be, or the next thing to look at, or things to include, accounts to include in this list is going to be, who are the ones that might be in trouble, that might not renew, right? Like, who are our at-risk accounts that we need to be having more conversations with, that we need to be engaging in a more proactive way ahead of time. Hopefully, if you've done these health scoring, if you have the pipeline set up, if you're having some conversations, if you have product usage data coming into HubSpot, I'm curious when you saw all of the room, and acknowledging not everybody here is for a SaaS business who has product data, but how many folks here are integrating data from external sources, sort of non-manually entered data into HubSpot? That number, 50%-ish of folks are integrating data. Okay. If you're integrating that data, that's likely some signs there. If you're not integrating data, figuring out ways to manually capture that data, proactively ask, send an email to capture some of that information is going to be helpful. And then the thing that is important is, okay, we have a way to see the accounts that have renewals, we have a way to prioritize those accounts in some way. What do we do with those accounts? This is really small, I know. We get it all after this, but we should be defining as much of this playbook, as much of this process around how our team is running a renewal in the same way that we define any process for sales, for marketing, or any other moment in the customer lifecycle. And in this particular, a nice way that I found to essentially create a project management tool in HubSpot, because if you use a workflow to create tasks, like creating tasks in a workflow is not a novel thing by any means. But one of the things you can do, and one of the things you probably, I guess, still doing, is you want to just dump a bunch of tasks. I say, okay, this is our renewal playbook. Here's 15 tasks for our CSMs. There's 15 tasks all at once, right? So we can use a workflow to space out those tasks. Let's run the workflow once, but delay in between the creation of tasks and say, okay, at this point in the time, like, we're going to start our really proactive renewal process 90 days before renewal, for example, for accounts that are not, if they're at risk, we want to probably engage them right away, but let's say, if they're not at risk, hold down. Let's start at 9 days before. Maybe the best thing that we're going to go ahead and do or create a task for is let's review that account. Let's take a deeper dive on that account. What are the things that they've actually done in the product? What are the things that what is happening? Let's do some account research. Like, let's approach this in the same way that we would approach any sales prospectors anywhere else in the customer lifecycle, and actually figure out what is going on in that business so that we can reach out with something that's valuable and contextual and helpful rather than just the, hey, 9 days before, let's talk about your renewal. Let's actually bring some value in that conversation. And then as we move through, we can sort of test it more specific, that are a little more collaborative maybe, in terms of getting them to the point where, again, hopefully we're able to lock in renewals before we get to that renewal date. If we have a renewal process, it's not just going to be auto-build. Or, in the case where it is going to be auto-build, let's let the customer know, this is going to be auto-build. Is this the right amount? Let's get ahead of that conversation before somebody gets an unexpected credit card charge or however they're paying a problem later. That's the first playbook that the first thing that I would do is let's lay out what are all the steps, what are all the tasks that we want to be covering, and then next, let's build playbooks in HubSpot around that. Whether you're using HubSpot playbooks as your way of defining your process, personally I like HubSpot playbooks because they allow you to dynamically pull in property values. You can sort of do some of that account prep, do some of that account research in a playbook and show folks, this is the health score for this account, this is the way they've used this feature, this is the number of active users they have, the number of users that have paid for that they paid for but are actually active in using the product. Those two things may be very different. And then we can start to use playbooks as a way to capture the information that we need to go ahead, build out more of a complete picture of this account in the renewal. And this one is probably not something you want to just do in the last 90 days. This is something that you should probably do the whole way through. You'll notice a theme here. You should be talking to your customers more regardless of their size. and you should be more transparent about how you're communicating the reality of their usage and the value that they're receiving from the product with what they know about that. Often, things are relatively opaque unless you go to a settings page in an app, unless you really dig into how you're using a product. And the worst thing that we want, or the best way to avoid unexpected churn is to be proactive and make sure that people know this is what I'm paying, this is how I'm using it, and this is the gap between those two things, right? Let's let people know this is the number of seats that we're paying for, this is the number of seats that we're actually using, this is the way that we're using the product, and as part of this, we can start to identify, okay, if there are gaps, let's work together and let's collaborate on closing those gaps so that the renewal, the best case scenario here, maybe I should lead with this, the best case scenario is that your renewal is a non-event, right? We didn't even think about it, of course we renewed. Like we couldn't live without this product. And the way to do that is start identifying those gaps, start closing those gaps before you get to the renewal time. You can automate this in Hubspot, you can automate this outside of Hubspot, but being transparent about how people are using the product is going to be really helpful. The thing that's probably more interesting here, okay, we figured out renewals a little bit, we have a playbook, we have a process, we have our pipeline, we have all these things that are going to come together to help us understand where accounts are, help manage that sort of bad case scenario, right? Like the at-risk account, get ahead of things there. What about the other side of this? Like how do we start to proactively expand accounts, especially if you are spending a lot of money to acquire an account? Like how do we get the best ROI on that acquisition? Is to go ahead and expand accounts. So some ways you might think about doing this, one of my favorite things about HubSpot is that you combine data from lots of different places in one place, and then make that data actionable for your teams who are actually interacting and engaging with customers. The first thing that we need to do is identify the accounts that might have potential for expansion. And there's a couple of ways that we can do this. I mentioned the sort of utilization, like they're paying for X, they're using Y. The delta between those could be bad or it could be good, right? Like if somebody has 90-95% utilization, maybe there's an opportunity to increase their usage. Maybe they are about to hit a limit, and we can get ahead of that moment, offer a discount, offer to support in onboarding those new team members, make sure that people who could be using the account are actually being successful with the account. And this will depend heavily on your pricing and billing model. I know all of these will apply to everybody, but that's the first one that I would look at. If you're in any kind of seat-based or usage-based model, where are we relative to our limits? How can we help get in front of people who might have an opportunity to expand? Feature usage is going to be another big one here, right? Feature usage, obviously very SaaS or very software specific, but equally applies to cross-sell in a non-software business, right? Who are the companies, who are the accounts who are using one piece of our product and using it very well, who could be using other pieces of our product and getting more value by expanding into new use cases, by solving problems that they're currently solving across multiple tools. There's a variety of value props we might want to sort of try and turn on with here, but figuring out who are the people who are using features well, and what are the other things that they could be using to get more value and increase their account value with us. And then finally, and we'll get into this in a second, Clay, just like the Clay build-a-thon up here. A great use case for Clay, and you can do this in a number of ways, you can do it manually, but who are the businesses? We talked a little bit about health scoring, one of the most impactful sort of attributes of health scoring being what is happening in the business context, what are the business goals that are being achieved with our product, what's happening in the business context that might make it an expansion opportunity. Is somebody hiring in key roles that we care about, or just hiring, generally if companies are hiring for sales, generally if they're hiring for support, they're growing. If we know that, we can be proactive about reaching out and getting ahead of that opportunity to expand somebody's usage. Good opportunity to expand somebody from monthly to annual. You can offer a discount on annual. If they're locking in more seats, they expect to grow, they have a growth plan. How can you better align with that? Help them get a better ROI on your product by consolidating things in one place, but also getting a little bit of a discount on your product. Or even if you're not discounting, we need to help onboard, we need to help your team grow and get more value and solve more problems the existing team members are solving, and we can do that proactively by knowing. And once we know some of those sort of signals on, Mason was just up here talking about account-based marketing, account-based, talks a lot about sales, but this really is very account-based, very similar types of stuff, right? We know our accounts, we have a very defined list of accounts, they just happen to be existing customers. What are we doing to engage with those customers? What are we doing to nurture those customers into the extra value that they can be receiving from our product. And then we can go ahead and build playbooks and build defined workflows around those different things. So it's, again, I mentioned playbooks. One of the really nice things there is you can pull in a lot of that data automatically. If you have the data in Hubspot, you're going to be able to use it in playbooks. You can use it in automated email templates. You can use it in tasks. You can use it all over the place. So really sort of trying to think about what is the data that is going to tell us this is an account that we want to be talking to. This is an account that we may be able to get an expansion or build an expansion opportunity, an expansion business case with, and then how do we turn that into something that's repeatable for our team at the right time. And then finally, what does that actual outreach look like? Is that creating a task so sales can go reach out manually? Is that automatically sending an email? Like maybe we hit a usage limit, you trigger an email that says, hey, we saw you just hit a usage limit. Maybe don't do that the first time, maybe do that the usage limit twice in, or a couple of times in the last 2 months, or whatever it might be. But how do we want that outreach so that we are at least starting the conversation, or we have a clear trigger point that is, we need to be starting this conversation before we get into renewal. Again, key element here is how do we move everything earlier in the customer journey so we can be proactive, so we have time before we're worried about getting into this sort of deadline of we have to get this done by our renewal date. Let's just do it when it makes sense for the business. Let's do it when it makes sense to add value. Ideally, again, lock in those early renewals if you are a good metric to track. The inverse of how many accounts are churning. How many accounts are we getting signed up or closing a renewal with before their renewal date? The earlier we can make that moment, the less of an event it is, the less stressful it is for everybody, the easier it is to predict future revenue beyond just that renewal date. There's workflows, I mentioned a couple of these I talked through the last slide, but there's certainly workflows you can implement here in HubSpot once you have that data around whether it's product usage, whether it's, we'll get into the sort of play piece here in a second, but this one specifically, seat utilization is over a certain value. Let's create some tasks, let's send an email to the customer, go ahead and prompt all of those things to happen so that you don't have to be manually digging through all of our accounts. Depending on your business, you have reps that have 5 accounts, 10 accounts, 150 accounts, right? Like it's going to vary a lot. The more that you can have some kind of automated trigger around these are the accounts that we want to be reaching out for, and this is what we're going to do, the better. And then, so this is a Clay one, and this works relatively, so I'm using Clay as an example here. Again, you can do this manually, but we're essentially looking at the number of open sales roles that the company has. You can do this by taking the company domain from HubSpot, going over to Clay, doing a LinkedIn lookup. They have a job, like open job posting in Richmond. How many of these defined roles you currently have open? Okay, if this value is more than X, probably if it's more than 0, honestly is a good starting point. But if you are hiring for these sort of growth roles, it's generally a good indicator that there might be an expansion opportunity. If that, both on the, you can get as sort of specific or as general as you like there, both if they're hiring for sales and support roles, they're growing, probably an opportunity there. Or, okay, we've sold you 5 seats, you're currently hiring for 5 of this role, and we know these seats are all, let's say they're all BDRs, and you're hiring for 5 more BDRs, well, you're probably going to need 5 more seats, right? So let's get ahead of that. Let's make sure that you know that's going to be an upgrade opportunity, but also let's make sure that those 5 new BDRs are getting onboarded, are going to be successful with the product, so that their usage, when we get 3, 6, 9 months down the line, looks good, and they actually have 10 active accounts instead of the 5 that they started with. And so this is some kind of roadmap. If you're just thinking about getting started, again, you're going to get all of this all at once. But if you're looking at some level of sort of maturity or tiering and how you might want to go ahead and roll this out, first things, are you tracking renewal dates? Are you creating new deals for post-sale opportunities? Do you have that renewal deal pipeline which is specific to recurring or existing business, distinct from the first time that you're closing a deal? And then, do you have some level of health scoring? Do you have some level of indication of how likely this account is to renew? Again, start with doing that manually. Just have a property that you update. Hey, this is one that we think is good. This is one that we think might be in trouble. And we'll start to segment out based on that. And then as you go further down here, are you reporting your revenue by that today, but really going into a little more. But are you reporting revenue or have access to reporting in HubSpot around what's new revenue, what's renewal revenue, what's expansion? Do you have expansion by product line, by customer segment, all these kinds of things that will ultimately be helpful in going in on who are the customers that we can identify earlier in the customer journey, who have the highest renewal potential, have the highest expansion potential, so that we can focus on those. again, back to the sort of account-based marketing analogy, or account-based ABX, ABS, whatever you want to call it. Back to that analogy, how do we identify the best accounts that we can continue to focus on, continue to build more of a repeatable playbook around over time, such to really zero in on this is where we should be spending our time, this is where we should be investing our resource. Because I know I said you should be spending more one-on-one time with your customers. That is really hard at scale, right? And that is very resource intensive. So making sure that you're spending that time with the customers who actually have the highest likelihood of being expansion opportunities is going to be really impactful. And then in this sort of final segment, how much of essentially take everything that you've done previously and automate everything, right? Are we automatically bringing product usage data into HubSpot, however you're doing that, whether it's a product analytics tool like June or Amplitude, whether it's a reverse ETL, whether it's you are just pulling in data, custom integration, whatever that might be. How do you pull that in and then start to build more of an automated model, also automated scoring, automated everything basically. In this life cycle, this last sort of stage. And to be clear, automate everything doesn't necessarily mean automate all your communication with customers, but automate the identification that would lead to contact with customers. Some of that communication with customers might be automated, but some of it could equally be, hey, this is the customer that we should manually reach out to. That's the progression that I would go through, depending on your company, depending on your data model, depending on which teams you have in HubSpot, will likely to dictate where on the spectrum you fall. But that's how I would approach that. And with that, I'm going to get into questions about anything that we covered here, anything post-sale in HubSpot. Happy to get into anything and everything here. Make sure that you scan this QR code or go to connect2gtm.com. The next edition of the newsletter will have everything here in a super package. So you will have all of that. I debated doing a demo of all this stuff in HubSpot, so it's cookie, and so I'll make sure they include all of that. It'll be in the newsletter. You get the package. So if you want to go actually implement it, it'll be much easier from there. But let's get into some questions. I want to hear from you all. What have you implemented so far? Where are the gaps you have today? Anything it's all about?
Hi, thanks so much, Stuart. At HubSpot, we are CSMs and we use a lot of our playbooks to help our customers to manage renewals in HubSpot. So this is great. One of the recent questions we are getting from customers when it comes to build a new health score is if you think it's manageable to build a health score without custom events. So for those that they don't have.
Health scoring without custom events? Yes, absolutely. Health score, I think the biggest mistake that you can make with health scoring is to try to include everything in your health score and try to cover every base with your health score. I think I took it out of this deck. Start as simple as possible with health score. So HubSpot with the new, and assume if you're doing the health scoring, assume these customers have Service Hub. So when you have the new customer success workspace, there's a default property that gets added for CSM sentiment, or I forget the exact name, but there is a new drop-down property which is essentially the CSM sentiment. If you do nothing else in your health score, just have that. And I think that you can absolutely start with how recently have you engaged with the customer? When was that last activity you have? Like, start very simple. Generally, I think engagement, like just when did it happen type data is not a great indicator, but if there is a customer that you haven't engaged with in 6 months, probably use that as push them at least into a lower health score. So you at least flag it as, let's go figure out more about this. And I think the biggest mistake the second biggest mistake after trying to make health scores overly complex is trying to make them 100% accurate. Treating health scores as just a directional indicator. This is a segment that we should probably engage more. This is a segment that is probably okay to push into a more automated type motion or lower touch motion. It's the best place to start. And I think that the thing that is really important is maybe much harder if you start complicated on a health score. Is the thing you always need to be doing with a health score is checking, does what we think or what we're saying in a health score actually reflect what happens come renewal, come expansion? If we have a lot of green health scores that churn, it is not a helpful health score, right? Because we're going to be ignoring all these accounts and churning anyway, right? So if you're building out a health score, you can go through all sorts of, again, depending on the sophistication or the sort of maturity of your data, you may actually, if you have a data team, for example, you probably should start with a regression analysis of what has happened over, what does our historical data say about who are the successful customers and what they do, and then build that into your health score. But if you're starting from scratch, you don't have that data, it's going to take, don't make it a 6-month project to go figure out what your health score should be. Just start with something and then look from, okay, when the renewal date came up, the health score was X. what happened. Did they renew? Did they expand? And really make it an iterative process where you're incrementally more correct over time, or a better indicator, a more accurate indicator. Versus trying to get it all right on day one, because it won't be right on day one. Even if you do the regression analysis, it won't be right. It won't be 100% accurate on day one.
I want to build something that can tell us when they drop in a certain number of seats, but I'm struggling with HubSpot to track changes of the properties. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can now create custom events based on property value or property changes, so that's one option. Although, and you can then use that custom event, you can use a change event in a workflow as a trigger in a workflow, and hey, that's an account that we need to do, so that's one thing that I would look at, I think. It's definitely in public beta, I don't know if it's out of beta yet, but if not, make sure you get access, I'm sure you can talk to a PM or something. But that's probably the thing that I would reach for, is like if you have a property where you're tracking that seat number, I'd probably create a custom event based on that property value change. To do that, otherwise the workaround is you create another property which is previous seat value and you just copy them between each other. You end up creating a lot of properties, but you have like current seat value, you have previous seat value, and you can just check if they're different or not. So that'd be the way without the event change. But given that you can use a custom event as a trigger in a workflow, I would probably just create the custom event based on the property value change, because that's also going to let you use it in reporting in a more easy.
Okay, so what if on the first of every month, I had last month, copied that into that, and then I could say if seat dropped by X.
Yes. Yeah, so I would, you would just create a calculated property, which is one versus the other, and it'll give you a percentage. It's not a thing. Like the account utilization score is exactly that. It's just a current value, previous value, whether it's previous value, current value, or whether it's total value versus active value, whatever it is. Just calculate a property, divide one by the other, times by 100 to get a percentage. You can then use that in a workflow trigger or wherever you need. Anybody else?
I want to ask about this account.
Sorry.
I'd like to talk about upgrades. The capabilities in the recurring revenue from Hubspot, which comes with Arabic memo, to match memo. Do you think that there are any other workarounds to make this process a little for customers?
Yeah, it's interesting there. The recurring revenue tool in Enterprise, honestly, I've implemented renewal management for, directly implemented for 4 or 5 Enterprise accounts and not used it. I think it's getting better. I think that if you want to use it, automatically copy the values from wherever you're capturing them, whether that's on the deal, whether that's on the company, into those specific properties so you can then use them in the reporting. So I would certainly automate that piece, just add a workflow, and whenever property value is tracking this changes, go update the specific field that you need. The way that I typically have done this is to create multiple properties that are previous starting renewal period value, current value, and then do a calculation between the two. So when you close an upgrade, you update from the deal to the company, what is the new value, and do the difference between the two. I would love to see that feature get better. Yeah, it's definitely a common thing. Thank you everybody so much for being here. Any questions, find me. I'll be around at the Central for the next in a few minutes, so stick around for that. But so much for being here. Thanks so much for supporting everything that I'm doing on the content side. I really appreciate it.
Let's give Stuart a hand there. Nice job so much. You heard him mention we've got a little